Hollywood's most successful director has a secret. While Steven Spielberg was building dinosaurs, crafting alien encounters, and creating war epics that grossed over $10 billion collectively, he was actually chasing ghosts. The ghosts of 6 films that haunted him so deeply, they shaped every frame he ever shot. And here's what nobody tells you. The man who created the summer blockbuster, who basically invented modern cinema as we know it, was once just a teenager in Phoenix, Arizona, walking out of a theater so stunned he literally couldn't speak. That film changed everything. And when you discover which one it was, his entire career suddenly makes perfect sense. But before we dive into the movie that made Spielberg pick up a camera for the first time, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we're about to reveal something fascinating. While everyone's talking about his mysterious new UFO film called The Dish, which just wrapped production with Emily Blunt and is coming in 2026, there's a deeper story here. The films that inspired Spielberg aren't just random favorites. They're blueprints. They're the DNA of everything from Jaws to Jurassic Park to Schindler's List. Here's the thing, you can fake a lot in Hollywood. You can fake enthusiasm in interviews, you can fake artistic vision, but you can't fake influence. And when Spielberg talks about these 6 films, something changes in his voice. The 78-year-old legend sounds like that Arizona kid again, discovering magic for the first time. Some films entertain you, others change your molecular structure. For Steven Spielberg, Lawrence of Arabia didn't just influence him, it possessed him entirely. Picture this, 1962, Phoenix, Arizona. A 16-year-old Spielberg walks into a theater with his parents. The lights dim. For the next 3 hours and 42 minutes, he doesn't just watch a movie. He experiences a religious conversion. And here's the wild part. He was so overwhelmed, he immediately went back and watched it 3 more times in the same week. I couldn't comprehend the enormity of the experience, Spielberg later admitted. He walked out of that theater and did something that would define his entire life. He bought the Maurice Jarre soundtrack on vinyl and played it obsessively, studying the liner notes like they were sacred texts. Why? Because buried in those notes were clues about how David Lean created what Spielberg still calls the greatest miracle ever captured on film. That miracle? The famous match cut. You know the one. Peter O'Toole blows out a match, and boom, we're in the endless expanse of the Arabian desert. It's a cut so perfect, so audacious, that film schools still teach it as the gold standard. But for Spielberg, it wasn't just technique. It was proof that cinema could be poetry. Listen closely to any Spielberg war film, Saving Private Ryan, Munich, War Horse, and you'll hear Lawrence of Arabia breathing through every frame. Those endless horizon shots in Private Ryan, that's pure David Lean. The way Munich opens with stark silence before chaos, Lawrence again. Even the moral complexity, heroes who aren't heroic, victories that feel like defeats, it all traces back to that Phoenix theater. But here's what really gets me. When Columbia Pictures decided to restore Lawrence of Arabia in 1988, guess who personally oversaw the project alongside Martin Scorsese? That's right, the kid from Phoenix was now powerful enough to resurrect his own inspiration. And during that restoration, Spielberg discovered something that still amazes him. There were details in the film he'd never noticed, even after dozens of viewings. It's the only film that still teaches me something new every single time, he said recently. And that's not Hollywood talk. That's a master craftsman admitting he's still a student. Now this is where things get weird, and I mean that literally. Steven Spielberg, the king of emotional storytelling, the master of making audiences cry over a rubber alien, worships at the altar of Stanley Kubrick's coldest, most emotionally distant film. 2001, A Space Odyssey is everything Spielberg's movies aren't. Glacially paced, deliberately confusing, almost mockingly indifferent to human warmth. So why does he call it one of his greatest influences? I never understood it, Spielberg admits. That's exactly why it blew my mind. Think about that for a second. Here's arguably the most successful filmmaker ever, saying he watches this film over and over just to feel small, not inspired, not motivated, small. He wanted to be reminded that cinema could do things beyond his comprehension. That's like Einstein keeping a math problem on his wall that he couldn't solve, just to stay humble. But the influence runs deeper than philosophy. Look at Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Those long, wordless sequences of spaceships dancing in the night sky? That's Kubrick's ballet of machines reimagined through Spielberg's wonder-struck eyes. The sterile future of Minority Report, the clinical horror of AI, all of it carries Kubrick's DNA. And here's the kicker. Kubrick and Spielberg weren't just mutual admirers. They were secret collaborators. Before Kubrick passed away, he literally handed Spielberg his passion project, AI artificial intelligence. Imagine that, the coldest director in cinema history trusting the warmest one with his final vision. Spielberg said yes immediately. You don't say no to your oracle. But wait, it gets even more intriguing. When Spielberg made AI, critics were divided. It was too cold to be Spielberg, too warm to be Kubrick. And that was exactly the point. It was a conversation between two masters, one from beyond the grave. Every frame was Spielberg asking, what would Stanley do? And then asking, what would Steven do? The tension between those questions created something nobody had seen before. Okay, this is where we need to talk about something Hollywood doesn't want you to know. The most successful director of all time once sat in front of his TV as a kid and cried so hard his parents got worried. The film was A Guy Named Joe from 1943. Not a masterpiece. Not a classic that appears on critics' lists. Just a weird little supernatural romance about a dead pilot who comes back as a ghost to guide his replacement, who happens to be falling in love with his girlfriend. Complicated? Sure. Profound? Maybe not. But for young Spielberg, it was everything. It hit me like a thunderbolt, he said. And he meant that, literally. This wasn't gradual appreciation. This was instant, overwhelming, almost violent emotional impact. The kind that rewires your brain permanently. Fast forward to 1989. Spielberg is at the height of his powers. He could make any film he wants. So what does he choose? A remake of A Guy Named Joe, which he calls Always. The critics destroyed it, audiences ignored it. It became one of his biggest commercial failures. And Spielberg? He didn't care one bit. I didn't want to outdo it, he explained. I just wanted to relive it. Think about that psychology for a moment. Here's someone so successful, so validated, yet still chasing the ghost of a feeling he had as a child. That's not filmmaking. That's therapy. That's trying to bottle lightning, knowing it's impossible but needing to try anyway. And you know what? Even though Always flopped, its DNA is everywhere in Spielberg's work. That supernatural element, the idea that love transcends death, that the past guides the present, it's in everything from Poltergeist to the BFG. Even in Schindler's List, there's this sense that the dead are watching, waiting, needing their stories told. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Before Steven Spielberg understood what a movie was, he understood what it felt like. Fantasia wasn't a film to him. It was a hallucination, a fever dream, a door to another dimension. Disney's insane experiment of setting animation to classical music with no dialogue, no traditional story, just pure emotion painted in Technicolor. For a kid in the 1950s, it was like someone had cracked open his skull and poured magic directly onto his brain. The screen opened and swallowed me, Spielberg remembers. Not, I watched it, not, I enjoyed it. The screen swallowed me. That's not how normal people describe movies. That's how people describe religious experiences or alien abductions. But here's what's genius about Spielberg's relationship with Fantasia. He didn't try to understand it. He just let it wash over him, teaching him that movies could be music, that stories could be told in pure feeling. And then he spent his entire career doing exactly that. You want proof? Close Encounters of the Third Kind literally has aliens communicating through 5 musical notes. Not words, not symbols, music. That's Fantasia filtered through Spielberg's lens. E.T.'s bike flight, watch it with the sound off, then watch it with John Williams' score. The music isn't accompanying the scene. It is the scene. That's pure Disney magic, refined into Spielberg gold. Even his approach to action sequences, the Raptor kitchen scene in Jurassic Park, the D-Day landing in Saving Private Ryan, they're choreographed like ballet. Violence as rhythm, chaos as composition. He learned that from watching Broomsticks march to Paul Dukas. And here's something beautiful. Decades later, when asked how to make films that work for both children and adults, Spielberg doesn't mention market research or demographic targeting. He just says one word, Fantasia, because that film taught him the ultimate secret. Emotion is universal. You don't need to understand it. You just need to feel it. This is the one that hurt. When Steven Spielberg first saw The Godfather in 1972, he didn't feel inspired. He felt defeated. "I'll never be that good," he told friends. Coming from anyone else, that might sound like false modesty, but Spielberg meant it. He genuinely believed Francis Ford Coppola had achieved something he never could. What destroyed him wasn't the violence or the plot or even the performances. It was the shadows, the silence, the way Coppola could say everything with nothing. Spielberg was the guy who moved cameras like they were on roller coasters, who painted with bright lights and soaring music. Coppola painted with darkness and whispers. But here's what's fascinating. Instead of avoiding that influence, Spielberg absorbed it, slowly, carefully, like a student copying a master's brushstrokes. You can see it first in Schindler's List. Those scenes in the ghetto, lit only by searchlights, the quiet conversations about life and death, that's the Godfather's shadow falling across Spielberg's lens. Munich is basically Spielberg's Godfather, a story about family, loyalty, and moral erosion told in hushed tones and sudden violence. Even the way he films conversations, two people in darkness, barely visible, letting silence do the heavy lifting, it's all Coppola. But filtered through Spielberg's humanism, it becomes something else. Where Coppola showed us moral death, Spielberg shows us moral struggle. The influence goes deeper than technique. The Godfather taught Spielberg that blockbusters could be art, that you could make hundreds of millions of dollars and still say something profound about the human condition. Before The Godfather, there were commercial films and there were art films. After it, Spielberg realized you could be both. "Coppola made me slow down," Spielberg admitted years later. "Made me stop showing off and just tell the truth, frame by frame." And now we arrive at the film that explains everything. The key to the entire Spielberg universe. And it's not what you'd expect. It's A Wonderful Life, a box office flop from 1946 that only became beloved through TV reruns. No special effects, no adventures, no spectacle, just a man, a small town, and a Christmas Eve breakdown that becomes a miracle. When young Spielberg first saw it, he didn't analyze it. He couldn't. He was too busy crying harder than he'd ever cried at a movie. George Bailey's desperation, his rage against his ordinary life, his discovery that his ordinary life was actually extraordinary. It destroyed something in Spielberg and rebuilt it better. "It's the movie that made me believe in stories," he said. "Not cinema, not filmmaking, stories." Here's what's insane. Every single Spielberg film is secretly It's a Wonderful Life. E.T., a suburban kid discovers the universe in his backyard. That's George Bailey. Learning Bedford Falls contains everything. Schindler's List, one man's small act saving worlds. That's George Bailey's every life he touched. Even Jaws is about a small-town sheriff protecting his community. That's George Bailey with a bigger shark. The Fabelmans, Spielberg's recent autobiographical film, is literally him saying, "I am George Bailey, a dreamer stuck in the ordinary. Finding the extraordinary was there all along." The whole film whispers, "This is my Bedford Falls. These are my angels." Frank Capra didn't just give Spielberg a favorite film. He gave him a philosophy. That hope isn't naive. It's brave. That sentiment isn't weakness, it's strength. That small lives matter enormously. Every criticism ever leveled at Spielberg, Too sentimental, too optimistic, too eager to please, traces back to this film, and he doesn't care. Because Capra taught him something critics never understood. Making people feel good is a moral choice. When Spielberg's father died recently, he said something remarkable. I finally understood George Bailey's father, and I finally understood George Bailey was my father. The film keeps teaching him, even now, even after thousands of viewings. But here's what nobody talks about. These 6 films aren't random. They're a map. They show exactly how Steven Spielberg built Steven Spielberg. Lawrence of Arabia gave him scope, the belief that cinema could be as big as the desert. 2001 gave him mystery, the understanding that not everything needs explaining. A Guy Named Joe gave him heart, the knowledge that emotion trumps logic every time. Fantasia gave him music, the realization that films are symphonies, not stories. The Godfather gave him shadow, the ability to find beauty in darkness. And It's a Wonderful Life gave him purpose, the mission to make people believe in miracles. Stack them together and you get the formula. Epic scope plus unexplained wonder plus supernatural heart plus musical storytelling plus moral complexity plus everyday miracles equals, well, it equals the most successful filmmaker who ever lived. And here's the thing, Spielberg isn't done learning from them. Even as he preps his mysterious new UFO film with Emily Blunt, even as Hollywood wonders if the 78-year-old master has another masterpiece in him, he's still that kid in Phoenix, still studying, still wondering, still chasing the ghosts of the films that made him. Because that's the real secret. Great artists don't overcome their influences. They surrender to them. They let themselves be haunted. And sometimes, if they're very lucky and very talented, they become ghosts themselves, haunting the next generation. Speaking of the next generation, what films have haunted you? What movies made you who you are? Drop them in the comments below, because everyone's got their own Lawrence of Arabia moment. And if you want more deep dives into what makes legendary directors tick, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We're just getting started uncovering the real stories behind Hollywood's greatest minds. Remember, Spielberg watched Lawrence of Arabia 4 times in 1 week and it changed his life. Maybe your life-changing film is just one click away.